I'd like to start with some words from the late Doug Tompkins. What happens when you get to a cliff and take one step forward? Or do a 180-degree turn and take one step forward? Which way are you going? Which one is progress? Well, surely here in Minnesota, in Lake Country, we have no cliffs, but we do. In fact, I'm an engineer, as Brian introduced me, so let's look at some data. According to the CDC, with the advances in microbial resistance, we are looking at the end of antibiotics, period. And there's a lead pipe cinch also with the CDC that maybe we shouldn't have put in all that lead pipe in the past. According to the CDC, 3,000 areas have more lead in their water than Flint, Michigan does. And of course, we moved out here to Bemidji for climate, and we certainly haven't seen peak climate. If you graph up the data from the National Weather Service, it becomes clear that if you look out into mid-century, even we here in Bemidji might not see temperatures below zero by mid-century. The final thing is something I'll call the rule of 50. If you look in the newspaper and you see an obituary, and it's less than 50 words, and the age of the deceased is less than 50 years, then you might be looking at a victim of suicide, alcoholism, or drug overdose. You may be looking at a victim of despair. And with our data, I started with antibiotics and water, and weather, because these are all things that I knew as a kid, and I thought we could take for granted forever. And if we can't take them for granted, then we may be coming to a cliff for all of us. If we're going to proceed, if we're going to thrive, we need cliff skills. Let's get some. We live in a world where three things predominate. There are three things we offer to this world: energy, brains, and money. Energy and brains are the fundamental things we contribute to each other in this world. Money is merely a token that we use to keep score. And these currencies have very different paths ahead. We are leaving an age of cheap, abundant energy. Back at the middle of the last century, you only had to burn about 1 barrel of oil to get 100 barrels into the economy. Of course, we went after the best sources first, and we've had a great 100-year run. But we're now coming up on what Charles Hall called the energy return on investment threshold. That's the minimum production efficiency that a modern society needs to take care of itself, to maintain itself. And we've certainly left the seemingly endless supplies of cheap energy that made many of our advances possible behind. At the same time, we're entering into an age of cheap, abundant information, cheap, abundant brains. Ken Jennings' defeat on Jeopardy to IBM's Watson would have been almost unthinkable even a generation ago. And some of the older folks among us here might remember Danger Will Robinson. With modern robots and the advances we make in them every day, those robots don't need to worry about Will Robinson anymore. They don't need Will Robinson. And this is all great. Energy and brains are good. And you might wonder, though, where's the money? We are now 7 years into a Fed funds rate of 0, a magnificent, unparalleled age of cheap available money. But no one knows quite where this train is heading. So let's sum up. With industrialization, we replaced labor with cheap energy. But if we leave the age of cheap energy, it's not clear how we'll move forward. Similarly, globalization then replaced onshore labor with cheaper offshore labor. Capital has mobility, but labor doesn't. And so this was actually a great path forward, but here too, the low-hanging fruit has been picked. So where do we go now? To see where we're going in the future, we need to look to the past. In legend, John Henry was a steel-driving man. But John Henry lost his battle with the engine. And subsequently, we have headed to a world where people no longer provide primary mechanical energy to business because every John Henry has lost his battle with the engine. Similarly, Ken Jennings lost his battle against IBM's Watson, and we may be looking at an age where people no longer provide routine decision-making to business. Now, the final piece of the puzzle is actually a legal case from about 100 years ago. In Dodge versus Ford Motor Company, we embraced the goal, the corporate goal, of maximizing shareholder value. And as long as maximizing shareholder value remains the goal, then every John Henry and every Ken Jennings is going to lose to the income statement advances that come from a succession of smarter and cheaper machines. So where do we go now? Do we take one step forward, or do a 180-degree turn and take one step forward? Here are some places where we can make progress. In the world ahead, localism beats globalism. Globalism has been a 30-year race to the bottom on wages, and it's not clear how good global supply chains are going to be in a world where we leave cheap energy. Second, friends beat friend requests. Harsh winters make good neighbors. If you think you might lose power in the next blizzard, then you really might want to know already who your friends are. Third up, smarter beats harder. Machine learning will take all of the routine jobs, but humans can do things. People can do things that machines cannot. Our forebears came here before Thinsulate and before Gore-Tex, and they thrived, and we will thrive. And finally, maybe not more, but better. We can thrive with the unique things we make for each other and provide to our world. So where do we go now? To the future from the past. The amazing thing is that we have been here before. Minnesotans came here and could have invented diversity with settlers, Dakota, and Ojibwe back before the term diversity even existed. The Dakota, at the time, were attempting the hardest transition in human history, the transition from hunter-gatherer society to agriculture, before there was ever a diet book on it. And the subprime mortgage crisis would be no news to 1850s-era Minnesotans, who already knew plenty about failed currencies and bad banks. The catalyst for the transition, we can actually put a finger on the single event that led to the world we live in today. The 1862 Dakota Uprising was a terrible and tragic event in our history. In 1862, information failed. The Dakota were new to agriculture. They weren't skilled farmers yet, and they had a failed crop the year before. Also in 1862, money failed. The Civil War was a conflict that the Union couldn't afford, and President Lincoln tried to paper over the deficits with a paper currency, greenbacks, that the Dakota didn't trust and they wouldn't accept. So in 1862, the previous poor harvest and late payments led to starvation, and starvation led to war. And that war led us to the world we're in today, but maybe in ways you wouldn't expect. One of the cadavers from the executions that followed the Dakota Uprising was taken by a local physician, William Morrall Mayo, who used it to train his sons, Will and Charlie. You may have heard of the clinic down in Rochester that Will and Charlie Mayo founded. Similarly, with the skirmishes that followed the uprising, the Dakota were forced west. This opened homesteads, including the homestead where William McKnight was born in 1887. He joined Minnesota Mining and Manufacturing in 1907, and in the 60-year career that followed, he created in 3M the innovating marvel that we know today. The troubles of 1862 were a terrible time, but in the crucible of difficult times, good people bond together and they create a better world that their children then can bring out to the world. But what about us today? Our financial system collapsed in 2008. And as I speak to you, we are 13 years at war. But here, these need to be the spark in us, in good people, to try to create a better world that we'll live in tomorrow. We are fortunate to live in the gig zone. Paul Bunyan Communications is a cooperative, one of a number of cooperatives that provide technology and essential services to us every day. Would those cooperatives have moved as broadly and as quickly if they were publicly traded corporations? I don't know, but as we are entering into an age of information abundance, we are fortunate to live in the gigazone. Because we need something different. We can borrow from the past, not to relive it, but to use it for something better. So we can find our future in that past, and there's a lot of good things to find. Today's paleo diet wouldn't be any news to the Dakota who came from hunter-gathering. You don't even have to stop there. Market gardens in France in the mid-18th century kept the world's third largest city supplied in fresh produce, and they did it both winter and summer. And they did it before the Green Revolution, with no GMOs, no artificial fertilizers or pesticides. So food is good, but again, you might be thinking, John, where's the money? The local solution for money is a local currency I'll call Bemidji bucks. With our university, our forests, and our lakes, wealth comes to Bemidji. But if that wealth shops in a chain store and pays with a credit card, that wealth flows right back out of Bemidji. Local currency can give purchasers a discount and keep the wealth that comes to Bemidji in Bemidji. A more general solution for money can be found next door to us in North Dakota, where the country's only state-run public bank is run. The Bank of North Dakota runs surpluses, and fracking boom or fracking bust, unemployment rates in North Dakota have been half the national average for the past 10 years. So food is good, and we've got some work to do on money. But what about medicine? I mean, the CDC said it's the end of antibiotics, period. Or is it? Here, the 21st century solution to the problem was found by a Viking studies expert, Dr. Christina Lee, in the wonderful, charming 9th century pages of Bald's Leech Book, which reads, "Take crop leek and garlic and pound it together with bullock's gall and wine and set it in a brass pot for 9 days. I'll leave out the bubble, bubble, toil, and trouble." But when Dr. Freya Harrison tried it, they found it to be every bit as effective as the best of our modern antibiotics. Our predecessors didn't have our science, but they were empiricists and they were inventors, they were creative. If we can discover their wisdom, we can adapt it to our time and create a better future with it. Now, at the top of this talk, I mentioned something I called the Rule of 50. And here in flyover country, it might seem unbelievable to think that anything as difficult as the social challenges of despair and addiction could be overcome with a single term as trite as innovation. But Enrico Moretti, in his book, The New Geography of Jobs, explains how just such a transition can be done. Innovation creates wealth. Wealth generation creates opportunities, and it creates hope. About a year ago, Inc. magazine named 4 Bemidji companies to its Inc. 5000 list of thriving companies. So great innovators have already come to Bemidji. We're entering the age of information abundance, and we have providers, as you have heard, that provide that information to us in abundance. But even the best bandwidth won't help if you don't do something with it. As we are Minnesotans, I am working on something I'll call social media for shy people. The scope of it is local, not global. The data is private and blockchained, and a HyperCard-like interface makes it possible for regular people to create interactions and explore the world around them. Entrepreneurship is really important to us here in Bemidji. The Launchpad gives us a place to all get together to move our dreams forward, and we have a strong entrepreneurial community to help turn ideas into reality. And finally, Bemidji State University, Northwest Technical College, and Concordia language villages all bring innovators and kids in from around the world. The Rule of 50 is a challenge for every community, and we need to plot our path forward. Our past isn't perfect, and it's easy to look at our predecessors, doctors with leeches, with scorn and derision. But it's a mistake if we do that. We are, of course, better adapted, better evolved to conditions than they were. But what if the conditions we evolved to no longer exist? In that case, in a world where industrialization replaced many hands with cheap energy, and globalization replaced onshore hands with offshore hands, in that case, the future then lies in a past that we can create to fit the conditions we live in today. So what happens when you get to a cliff? Do you take a step forward, or do a 180-degree turn and take one step forward? We can move forward by embracing the past. Here in Bemidji, we are local. If we can't get blueberries flown up from Chile, we'll grow them here ourselves. We are community. If you are not in community, then 30 below winters might not appeal to you. But when it gets cold, we go ice fishing. We are smart. Our university, colleges, and schools are the center of our community. And our goals are not more, but better. So let's make that turn and take that step. The thing I love most about Bemidji and northern Minnesota is our community. And meals, money, and medicine are just a sampling of the wonderful things in our past that we can rediscover and bring into our future. Many people vacation in Bemidji. We live here. We can move forward by looking to our past. In this way, we will thrive. Thank you.